All right, we'll get started slowly and hopefully others will join in. Welcome everyone. Bonjour, bon matin, bon après-midi, depending where you're joining from. My name is Annie Birubé. I'm the Program Director for Climate at the McConnell Foundation. I'm joining you today from unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, also known as Ottawa. While we have many participants today across Turtle Island, I would invite us all to reflect and in a moment to express our gratitude for the Indigenous people who have stewards the lands and water that allow us to live, work, and play where we currently reside. Today we'll be talking about potential levels and roles that philanthropic foundations in Canada could play to accelerate deep energy retrofit in residential buildings, specifically multi-residential building and low-income residences. And I just wanted to take a moment to provide a bit of context of why McConnell is interested in this work. We are a signatory to the Philanthropic Foundations of Canada Climate Pledge, and I hope most of you are. And we have committed to mobilizing our resources through our granting, our philanthropic granting, as well as our endowments, our assets, and our investment to address the climate crisis. As you know, we have an affordability crisis at the moment. We have a climate crisis at the moment, and buildings play a critical role at the intersection of these two crises. Statistics Canada estimate there's about 15 million dwellings in Canada. So this is the most generic term for this is where people live and reside, whether you're a homeowner of a private home, whether you own a duplex or semi-detached, whether you rent a townhouse, a condo, whether you live in a multi-residential unit, all this existing building stock needs to be as energy efficient as possible if we are to meet our climate target in Canada. Currently, the building sector is responsible for about 12% of our national carbon pollution. This includes commercial building and residential buildings. So today we're only going to be talking about the residential part. But the carbon pollution that is emitted by the building sector has been increasing annually since 1990. So we've not really begun to tackle this massive challenge. Concurrently, many Canadians, more Canadians every year live in energy poverty. Energy poverty is defined as a household that spends more than 10% of its revenues towards heating or cooling. And so many Canadians face the difficult choices to either pay the utility bills, turn down the heat, or buy food. The cost of energy has risen much more rapidly in recent years than the rate of inflation has. We have in Canada had an affordable building stock that was built mostly in the 60s and the 70s. So this is when most level of governments were in the business of building social affordable housing. And so we have a legacy of old buildings that date from the 60s and the 70s. And this still constitutes today a big chunk of our rentals housing stock in Canada. These older multi-residential buildings tend to be very, very poor when it comes to energy efficiency. Sometimes they consume 200% more energy than a building built after 2005. So the differences are drastic. And these older units tend to be occupied by lower income households because they are more affordable. However, the cost of utilities is quite high. If we don't maintain our old rental housing stock, then we lose affordable housing. There have been examples across the country of electrical fires in older buildings that have led to the loss of multiple rental buildings. And these older buildings are not prepared to be resilient to the impacts of climate change. So they're not prepared to protect tenants and occupants from heat waves, for example. So it is a big challenge. Currently, there is a lack of capital investment, financial incentive for either the owner of a multi-residential building or an owner of a home to do a deep energy retrofit. Oftentimes, when real estate owners of large multi-residential unit go ahead with a retrofit, it leads to significant rent increases and leads to eviction. This is a phenomenon that's well documented, but there need not be a trade-off between tenant rights and deep energy retrofit. So this is a big challenge that we are facing today, whether it's people living in urban areas, in rural areas, people who rely on oil, propane to heat their homes, tenants in multi-residential units who don't have any means or incentive to reduce their electricity costs. This is what we're interested in learning more at McConnell, and to see if we can play a role, because it's important to address the climate crisis, but there are many, many co-benefits in terms of improving the health of the occupants in those buildings, lowering costs, addressing energy poverty, and as well as creating very good job in the trades and in the local economy. So this is just the context I wanted to present. We have tasked Leslie and Alex from Dunsky to give us an overview of what might be some levers that philanthropic foundations can play to address some of these challenges. So today we're joined by Leslie Malone, who is a managing consultant with Dunsky's financing practice, with a specific focus on serving underserved communities, and with Alex Hill, who's been a managing partner for 15 years at Dunsky, really specializing in building decarbonization. So Leslie and Alex will take us through their findings and their recommendations. We will be pausing during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat. So I do encourage you to ask a question in the chat or to indicate with a star if you'd like to speak. It is a very technical, complex field, so we want to make sure that you are able to ask questions and to really appreciate the research and the findings that went into this work. So again, I'm monitoring the chat, so please let us know if you have any questions, but otherwise, Leslie, Alex, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Annie, for the introduction and for having us this afternoon, and welcome everyone. So as Annie mentioned, we'll be presenting the findings from work that we did over the last year or so on opportunities for the philanthropic sector to accelerate residential deep energy retrofits in Canada. And as Annie mentioned, the particular focus of this work is low-income, affordable housing and Indigenous communities. And before we get started, I should note that the webinar will be recorded and sent to registered attendees. So, in case folks are not familiar with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors, we're a consulting firm based in Montreal with offices in Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, and Halifax. We're dedicated to accelerating the clean energy transition through our analytic work, as well as strategy development within the buildings, mobility, industry, and energy sectors. And we're increasingly engaged with governments and utilities and others such as McConnell to assess and design financing programs. So the plan for today is that I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the project, the key takeaways from the landscape assessment that we conducted, and then to quickly highlight our recommendations. At that point, we can take a pause or perhaps before the recommendations for questions. And then the remainder of the time will be dedicated to a more in-depth discussion on each of the recommendations, which Alex will facilitate. And then if possible, we'll try to keep a little more time at the end for questions. So just to set the stage, and Annie started to do this at the beginning, so to reinforce her point, as you're aware or now aware, housing and climate change are two of Canada's most pressing challenges. And focusing on residential deep energy retrofits offers a chance to tackle both of these issues. And as, again, Annie mentioned, not only will this afford an opportunity to save greenhouse gas emissions, but efficiency and other clean energy investments also offer an entry point to low-income, affordable housing renewal. So to address some of the deferred maintenance costs and other critical concerns, such as resiliency and health and safety, which in turn promote housing equity. And while we appreciate that Foundation's capital is limited and the dollars needed for efficiency and other building upgrades is truly staggering, a key takeaway from the work that we did for McConnell is that there is an opportunity for the philanthropic sector to play a catalyzing role in this space where others cannot, and help unlock some of these opportunities. And again, just to reinforce the point about the Canadian philanthropy commitment on climate change, in doing so, you would be acting towards the fourth pillar of this commitment related to endowments and assets. And through today's presentation, the intention is to provide you with a researched approach on how you can take action in the near term. All right, so I'm going to jump in. The approach that we took for this particular project was to begin with a literature review of relevant reports and program design documents, both at the federal and provincial levels. We then conducted 16 interviews with nonprofit housing providers or associations, for example, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. We also spoke with Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation and Quartier Son Quartier. We spoke with lenders such as Van City and Efficiency Capital, project developers. One example would be Pace Atlantic in the Maritimes, and then other experts such as Cambo and Efficiency Canada. We mapped their feedback to actions that were identified in Efficiency Canada's retrofit mission report, which came out just over a year ago or so. And then through that exercise, we were able to develop a sense of the best fit ways for the philanthropic capital to complement and amplify what's already happening or not within the space. So in terms of what we heard from the landscape review and assessment, oh, I apologize, I skipped over a slide. Apologies for that. Yes, so what we heard in terms of how you can bring transformative financing practices to target recipient groups, we heard that there's a need to increase the understanding and ability to pursue retrofit opportunities. So this boils down to an education and capacity issue. There's also a need to prove that existing or emerging strategies and models can work within these underserved communities. And as well, that your capital can be used to ensure that target groups are not left out of the transition. In terms of what you as the philanthropic sector can do that others cannot or will not, we heard that you have the opportunity to connect financing to broader social and climate mandates. So to tie those issues together when programs currently do not. Perhaps they're just focused on GHGs or on other building upgrades. You can take losses intentionally, absorb risk, and kickstart new investment models. And something that we heard time and time again through the interviews is that you have flexible capital, which means that you can accept longer repayment terms that are suited to retrofit payback periods. And importantly, where should you start? We heard that building the pipeline, ensuring that underserved groups are at the table is critical. Also working with practitioners to develop new capacities so that they're well positioned to actually move forward with projects. And then to link investment to equity and reconciliation by promoting housing affordability and supporting workforce development and entrepreneurship that affords upward social mobility. And now to my slide that I previewed. Ultimately, the common theme that emerged from the interviews, or common themes, boils down to the two C's, capital and capacity. You may be aware that there is already capital available for low-income affordable housing and Indigenous peoples, and there are capacity development components in existing grant and loan programs. For example, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Sustainable Affordable Housing Program. So the question is, what is inhibiting action at scale, and how can these levers, capital and capacity, be manipulated to overcome blockages in the system that are holding back these good projects? And this is my last slide. I'm happy to take a quick pause before we transition over to the recommendations. Are there any questions, Annie?
I'm not seeing any questions for now in the chat.
I suspect the hard ones will come for Alex.
Yes. So
All
let's
right.
continue.
I'll just quickly highlight the five recommendations that boil to the top in terms of near-term action. So the first is to address the readiness gap during the critical project development and origination phase. Second, provide low-cost capital that allows energy retrofits to go deeper. Third, support lenders who offer non-extractive financing for low-income homeowners. And again, we'll dive deeper into these examples and the terminology. Fourth would be to combine capital sources to address multiple community priorities. So not everyone is concerned about climate, but health and safety could be front of mind. And then the fifth is to support energy retrofit workforce development in disadvantaged communities. And I think with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Annie. Yes, I'm going to walk through each of these specific recommendations and give a few examples that maybe, hopefully, will paint a bit of a clearer picture of what we mean specifically. So first one is the readiness gap. I think one of the key things that came to light through the research we were doing is there are quite a lot of capital options out there for affordable housing, whether it be single family homes or multifamily homes or houses on Indigenous land or for Indigenous communities. The question is what are the missing pieces? Where are the gaps? And how do you access the other sources of capital, work with them in conjunction to put together the retrofits that achieve deep savings and also address the full range of needs? And the other thing I would point out is that even if there are other sources of capital available, the needs are so large that no one source is ever going to do the whole job. And so, there's all the different opportunities need to be leveraged to create a robust financing environment. So these are some places we saw that philanthropic money could make quite a difference. So the first one is the readiness gap. As we were doing the work, actually CMHC released the Canada Greener Affordable Homes program, which provides quite a substantial amount of capital and even covers some of the upfront costs for planning. But even within these types of initiatives that are available, there's still some very early stage needs within the affordable housing sector. So, that the initial steps of assessing the buildings, developing a plan, engaging with the affordable housing operators or the different not-for-profits that are running the buildings to help them see those opportunities. In many cases, they may not even be aware of the other capital that's out there. So it's sort of a combination of opportunity assessment upfront, as well as engagement with the parties that could implement the retrofits themselves, and putting money at a stage where accessing it's the riskiest stage of the project when you first start to engage. And that's why bridge capital at the beginning is often very expensive, or if you want to come in with development capital, it's often very expensive as well. So we saw this as an opportunity for the philanthropics to fill this gap with some capital funds that could then be also tied to some of the other solutions that we're talking about here, where if the foundations came in and provided that upfront support, there'd also be an understanding that the larger pools of capital that you may be able to put together could then be leveraged to actually carry out the projects. So the example investments could be supporting an affordable housing service provider to offer comprehensive retrofit plan development. I think of the example in Quebec with the Group Resource Technique, and engaging with one of them to create a retrofit service for the local affordable housing community, co-funding the assessment, capital plan, overall business case for housing, multifamily housing projects that would like to approach programs such as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Sustainable Affordable Housing Program is another opportunity, or providing bridge financing. In many cases, there is capital and financial support available, but it doesn't come until later stages when the retrofit is being carried out or is completed, and the construction groups may not be willing to wait to that point before they start to get payments. So again, there's an opportunity to offer low-cost bridge financing that allows the projects to get moving. Some of the support that would back this up is creation of a standard origination process or tool with the affordable housing providers or with a technical support group. So that's sort of like an intake process that makes clear to the building managers the opportunity and the steps they would have to go through, and has some initial screening. Could be relatively standardized and simple, but straightforward and clear, and gets the ball rolling. And then also build out some of the standard planning tools, perhaps remote auditing capability, to get an initial assessment and convince the affordable housing providers of the opportunity that is there. So ultimately, this would have the impact of shifting the development risk from the owner, who would initially have to take on that time or cost. And it would also create the opportunity to assess the retrofits and consider opportunities related to deferred maintenance and social benefit needs, all in the same package. So I think that's the first one. I'm just wondering if I could take, I see, there's a question about, will we have access to the slides? I believe the recorded presentation will be circulated. Will we also circulate the slides themselves?
Oh, Annie, you're on mute.
We'll get that right one day. Yes, we'll circulate the slides and the report.
Great. So coming to the next one, this is what I talked about briefly in the last slide, is also putting together an actual pool of capital that can get the projects done. As I said, there are sources of capital available, but the needs, I think, far outstrip the available capital overall in the market, and different conditions might be attractive to different affordable housing providers. So, foundations could collaborate with the public and private lenders to establish a pool of funds on favorable terms. Possibly, ideally taking what we call sort of a first in, last out kind of position. So first losses could accrue to the foundations, and if they have the patience to be the last ones paid out, perhaps even from an equity position rather than a debt position, that could really be attractive to pull in private capital providers, or possibly even actors such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank to provide more of the capital. So it would actually follow quite similar to the model that Canada Infrastructure Bank uses currently to support groups like SOFIAC, and I can't tell you the full name of that acronym because I don't know it offhand.
Something.
Okay, thank you, Annie.
But just one quick question, Alex, if we could. It's a good point that, NRCan has released its Retrofit Accelerator program. So I think they'll be announcing their recipients imminently, to aggregate retrofit projects in different communities. My understanding is there will be between 10 and 12 Retrofit Accelerator programs across Canada, not a whole lot. So just wondering what you're suggesting in terms of capital, philanthropic investment for the readiness, how this complements this proposed Retrofit Accelerator program.
I think, Andy, that's one of the challenges of working in this space, is that it is getting a lot of attention and is changing quite quickly. And I don't believe that program had been announced at the time that we put this report together. So I offhand, I can't give you a specific example about how to work with that program. I'm not as familiar with it as it sounds like you are. And maybe the answer is that you're not necessarily working with that fund itself, but you're covering gaps where eligibility may not projects that would not necessarily be eligible, or putting together alternative pool of capital for when those programs are exhausted, fully subscribed, and the capital is no longer there. As far as working directly with it, I'd have to get back to you and look into exactly how that's structured in order to be able to make a suggestion.
But all this to say, I can say it won't be sufficient for the readiness gap that you've identified, because I think there are between 10 and 12 retrofit accelerators that will be launched in that program. So, it will cover a fraction of the multi-residential market. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, as far as even if the opportunity to create the larger capital pools to do the large project investments becomes narrower as government players step into that space, the other opportunities that we're talking about here, and Andy, you're absolutely correct, that readiness gap, getting the projects in the door to those funds, that may become more and more the most appropriate role for the foundations to play. And with time, we'll see whether the government capital is sufficient to cover all those needs. And if it isn't, then this number 2 here would be a model that you could work with, perhaps to attract private capital into the space by absorbing those first losses, providing the equity piece up front, and being willing to stick around until everybody else is paid out and collect your repayments at the end of the project. So it really is, I think, on a province by province, community by community basis, that you can understand whether there's a need for the capital pool, or whether it's really more a focus on getting the projects in the door to the existing government capital pools. So I think the capital support here, or capacity support, is mostly related, once the pool's set up, is making sure the applicants are fully aware and have exhausted all the grants and capital sources at their disposal. It makes the projects, improves their paybacks, and ensures that they're financially viable for the returns, and also helps to protect the foundation money when it is ultimately paid back. And the impacts are, your pool of capital could focus on more comprehensive retrofits that may be possible from existing capital sources, may increase access for groups that may not be eligible for the existing capital sources, or may cover other needs if those capital sources are exhausted. And I think from that we could go to the third recommendation. The third recommendation is really targeted more at single-family homeowners. Within that space, there are more and more programs. There's the Canada Greener Homes grants and loans, as well as some communities are putting in place things such as property assessed clean energy financing, or even on-bill repayment through their utility bill financing, or other private loans through groups like Man City and Royal Bank of Canada. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is supporting non-extractive financing. And non-extractive financing refers to creating a set of repayment conditions that have a degree of flexibility and reliability to them, such that the burden and the risk doesn't land excessively on the homeowner. And if the homeowner, in many cases, lower income homeowners, or people experiencing energy poverty, if they get themselves in a position where maybe they're in delinquency for a number of months, for many reasons, there's an understanding within the program that there are mechanisms to delay those payments, to restructure the financing, and to do everything possible to avoid defaulting on those, which may lead to repossession of equipment, or may lead to eroding their credit score, or could have even more detrimental impacts, such as if it was part of a property assessed clean energy program, even repossession of the home. So there are different models that are out there, and usually in order to create a non-extractive financing model, what you need to do is the philanthropic money, the foundation money, would step in to cover some of that risk that the frontline lender would be taking on, and some of the costs associated perhaps with accepting delays on repayment or restructuring the repayments. So the other thing it does typically is that the non-extractive financing works best when it tailors the repayment to the actual amount of bill savings that customers receive, so that there's a clear connection between energy savings and the amount repaid, and you're not in a position where the homeowner is paying more than what the benefits accruing back to them are. So some examples of this are, there's a model that's well known, although I don't believe it's currently applied anywhere in Canada, called Pay As You Save, which combines a utility bill repayment model with an estimated bill savings in each month or each year. And the repayment that you make through your utility bill is equivalent to the estimated savings, which can be calculated either upfront in the program or calculated as the repayment takes place by comparing bills year over year. There's also many municipalities that are putting in place PACE, that's the property assessed clean energy programs. And in many cases, they are looking at having as beneficial terms as possible for homeowners, but they don't always have a way of structuring around delinquencies and defaults to avoid tax sales. So particularly for low moderate income homeowners or other people experiencing some challenges of energy poverty or equity seeking groups, that could be an area where you step in with a loss reserve, perhaps, to cover some of those potential losses.
I could just jump in here, Alex, for the
absolutely
programs, and there is a little bit of funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities through their Green Municipal Fund for municipalities to design these kinds of PACE program, but we're offloaded and downloading sometimes on very small municipalities with small budget, the complexity of putting in place financial mechanisms and repaying this energy saving on their municipal tax bill. So even though there's a little bit of money there, smaller municipalities are not able to access these funds. So maybe that's a place where philanthropy can help. And also I know that Mars is looking at sort of bundling small municipalities so they can co-design their own PACE program. But again, these are some examples of the barriers where I mean, we need a financing mechanism, and then we need some capitalization to come in, and the question is who's going to capitalize for these smaller municipalities, right?
Yeah, that's right, Annie. And again, we're talking about a very quickly changing environment here. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been providing program design money as well as capital and program support money to a number of municipalities, and continues to do so. I believe they've got a few more years left that they're running their program. They've updated and changed some of their eligibility requirement in order to disperse the money more evenly across Canada, because it's been quite concentrated in Eastern Canada and in Ontario up till now. So there are opportunities with small municipalities, but also perhaps filling some of the gaps that are left by the FCM's shift of their program priorities. And that could actually mean helping to recapitalize some existing programs that are out there. The needs are quite large, and I don't think we focused on that at the time in the report too much, because the FCM at the time was offering that capital to everybody. But since that's shifting, there are some programs that could be potential opportunities for foundations to work with to maintain the programs that are running. And your point about accessing for smaller municipalities, Mars is looking at this. I believe Clean Air Partnerships has looked at this, and we've been working with a number of smaller municipalities to try and find models that are third-party delivered, as light on the administration side as possible, and where many municipalities could work together to put in a similar model, or even work under the same program umbrella. So yeah, there's absolutely lots of opportunity in this space. And since the Federation of Canadian Municipalities' initial investments, it's really raised the interest and the desire for municipalities across the country to put their own PACE programs into the market in order to meet their municipal climate change goals. Again, I think that the piece that the foundations could really focus on is ensuring that there's a robust low to moderate income component within those programs, and open up that eligibility and cover some of that risk, as well as providing the capital to make it possible. And I think that brings us to, I see some questions before I move on. I'm not sure if they're...
I can read them out for you if you'd like. From Eric Campbell. So we've put an emphasis on drawing on foundation investment for portfolio to provide capital for specific retrofit project. Eric is more interested in the role of traditional grant making. Can you specify where grants are best targeted in a context? I think we're coming to that in the later part of the presentation. There's some additional barriers where granting will be the mechanism. So, And then the other questions from Jessica regarding pay as you save. Do you risk adding a huge administrative burden to a program with this design? Trying to imagine how you would calculate saving, which is not always simple.
Sure, both of those questions quickly. As far as the granting piece goes, we'll talk more about it in the other recommendations, but in each of the recommendations, there is, I think, a role for granting, particularly around the capacity support, because to do the readiness gap, we talked about things like the origination tools and some of the, so some of the tools that can help people like the Group Resource Technique or the other affordable housing support, technical support groups across the country, to have the tools in place to be able to set up their membership or the affordable housing providers in their communities to go after the money that's there. So I think there's a granting opportunity in that. Similar for the pay as you save or the sort of non-extractive financing, it could be some granting to help a municipality or utility set up that program or put the tools in place, or even to do the study to understand what the needs are and how they could structure it. So I do think there are granting opportunities across this, and I would focus really on that capacity support element that we talk about under each of the 5 recommendations, which we'll see more about in the next ones, as Annie mentioned. Pay as you save, Jessica, your question, you're absolutely on the mark. There's a reason we don't see them very often, is because they are administratively more complex. The idea is it's more complex, but the value it delivers is much higher. Because it really offloads that risk from the homeowner, and it creates a mechanism to get some of those as we call harder to reach or underserved portions of the community within programs where they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So I think it typically works well when it's done at scale, and where you can actually get enough participation from the initial administrative burden and setup. So that it would be the larger utilities who could put it onto their utility bill of payment systems. And then as far as the energy savings, the best we can do typically is through the EnerGuide system. Most programs require an EnerGuide audit, which is provided through an EnerCan program. And that does give you an estimate of energy savings down the road. And then from there, utilities usually have a year-over-year tracking of energy bills. So should be able to give you an estimate of the energy bill savings after you account for climate change, or I guess weather changes year over year. So yes, these are tricky things, but there are solutions out there, I guess, is the answer to that question.
And I think it's important to realize that it's not the role of philanthropy to come up with these technical solutions. There are third-party organizations and retrofit experts and any audit who have the solution, right? They need the consultation capital and added capacity that Leslie and Alex have been talking about.
Absolutely. And there's more and more groups operating in this space, and more bright ideas coming to play. And, virtual audits are becoming more and more recognized across the country. So yeah, I think we'll see opportunities across the board. So I think we move on to the 4th one. So the next one is really about, looking for the opportunity to carry out the deep energy retrofit and get the energy savings and the greenhouse gas savings at the same time as addressing the full range of needs within the affordable housing sector. So, many affordable housing projects have deferred maintenance needs and health and safety needs. And if some of the programs are directed very squarely just on the energy savings, might overlook those and might not speak to the priorities of the affordable housing providers. So the idea here really is this is sort of an extension, I would say, of recommendation number 2, where you look at a capital pool that comes in alongside the available grants and financing, and takes that first loss position, pulls in private capital to the degree possible, leverage your money as much as you can, but really focuses on in doing that initial opportunity assessment and capturing projects that include energy retrofit alongside the full range of needs within those affordable housing projects. And I think part of it too is really understanding that pool of capital would develop its own expertise attached to it, which would understand all the different granting and financing sources that are available to affordable housing projects so that it is covering all of those needs. Because I think one of the things that often holds back is there may be an awareness of, well, we can get this money for the energy piece, but how do we get the money for the other pieces, or vice versa? So it's a combination of putting the pool of capital in place and attaching to it a solid knowledge base and analysis tools that can show the full range of financing available to cover the full range of needs. I think that's the key part of this one. I'm not seeing any more questions, so we can go on to the last one. The last one is a little less about the delivery of the capital and more around how the retrofit projects get done. And we often think about the beneficiaries of investments made in affordable housing as being the affordable housing projects themselves, but of course there's a whole contractor network that carries out the work as well. And up until now, I think we've seen it largely, focused on the end recipient and a little less on the process for getting there. We see this a lot more in the United States. If you look at the Investment Recovery Act Justice 40 requirements, they actually require that a substantial portion of the financial benefits from investments that are supported by the Inflation Reduction Act capital actually go to disadvantaged communities. We also see this very commonly. We often work with utilities in the United States, and we see quite often that they'll put it in their procurement requirements that you have to have a certain portion of your team as recognize small businesses, women-owned businesses, or minority-owned businesses as examples. So the question here is, how can you build that into your process as you make investments in the affordable housing sector? So part of it is putting the requirements in place, but there are also opportunities to work with some of the existing industry associations, such as NYMA, who represent the insulation providers, and HRI, who represent the HVAC providers, and they have amazing education tools that can be shared across the country. They can be leveraged and shared across the country. So it's great to put requirements in for equitable access to the opportunities created by the investments from the contractor perspective. But if there isn't a contractor community that has significant representation from diverse groups and equity seeking groups, then you're never going to hit those targets anyway. So it's kind of a dual focus here. One is put the requirements in place, and the other is invest in the in-person trainings that leverage workplace development tools from the trade associations, direct foundation funding to stand up some of these entrepreneurial and workforce efforts. And part of it too is also recognize that there's a cultural shift that's needed on both sides, both new entrants to the trade as well as the existing tradespeople, to make sure that this is a supportive and welcoming environment for people to pursue their careers. So, the capacity support is focused on training in the rapidly growing sectors. Electricians, we keep talking about electrifying everything in the decarbonization movement. We have nowhere near enough electricians. I think anybody who says they're looking for a new career, who's, any young people I know, I'm always like, you should really think about being an electrician. I think there's going to be amazing opportunities there. There's energy advisors, particularly outside of the major centers, the people who can deliver the energy audits, who can give you an estimate of the energy savings in a multifamily building and point out where the opportunities are, who can get you ready, who can address that readiness gap by creating, defining the projects. All of these, we need far more capacity. And then of course, HVAC is heating, air conditioning. So people who can install heat pumps and service heat pumps, as well as other of the equipment associated for distributing the air within buildings, and insulation installers as well. So the industry is growing, the needs are growing, and the opportunities are growing. And let's make sure that, this initiative tries to make sure that everybody can have equitable access to those opportunities as the investments are made.
Yeah, and there's a lot of very good work and evidence that shows that investment in energy efficiency trickle down to the local economy by a factor, I forget how many, but But we need to make sure that, in those, I mean, those are local projects, like you're actually fixing local buildings, and you don't want outside big contracting firm to come in. You want that to generate community benefits. So there's many opportunities to make sure that the skills, the trades are there in the local community to do the work.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just to reinforce the message, it's really two things have to go hand in hand. One is put the requirements on how the money if you're going to put the money out the door, put the requirements on, who's going to be involved with the projects. But then second of all, there also needs to be some investment in building the workforce to actually be able to actually have that representation as well. And I think that brings us to our last slide. I haven't been tracking the questions. I'm not sure if I don't see any further questions.
Alex, you're good. I'll let you know.
Okay, good. Unless I forget, who does the conclusion? Do you do it or do I do it?
I think you're on a roll.
Okay. So I think, the overall message here is that foundations can bring transformative financing approaches to your target groups, despite that, we recognize that there are more and more players and more opportunities, which is wonderful. There still are some gaps. So there's been significant innovation in the retrofit financing space in recent years, but it often overlooks low-income, Indigenous and First Nations and other underserved markets. It's getting better, but there's still gaps. And emulating these approaches can be accomplished by covering the additional perceived credit risks to the lenders. So grants and loans may be available. Are they accessible? That's the key question to be looking at. Look for the gaps in the accessibility, whether it's by eligibility or whether it's the process that it takes to go through to even get to the application for the available funds. So they're often generous lending or granting terms for affordable housing projects, but housing providers need assistance to even consider accessing them. And then the non-extractive piece, again, can open some of these emerging single-family home opportunities to allow low-income or low to moderate income households to access the same opportunities. And then, as we said, mobilize your capital, but attach some strings, direct investment in capacity development, combined with EDI requirements in how that money gets used and how the actual pooled capital or investments get used can be a sort of a powerful 1-2 punch in getting a more equitable distribution of how those benefits flow. And I think that brings us to the
good point in the chat, Alex and Leslie, that education of the trades is an important component to delivering deep energy retrofit high performance project. Otherwise, there's a perceived risks amongst the trade right now on affordability, payback time, and so that's another barrier, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Education of the trades. I think our feeling at the end of this is if we only educate them on that, they absolutely need to be educated on that. If we only educate them on that, we might miss out on some of the EDI opportunities as well. So that also should be considered. But by all means, they do need to, the building industry moves relatively slowly and for good reason. Our buildings have to be safe. They have to respect code, and they have to use proven solutions. And so people who've been doing something for 20 or 30 years don't change overnight their approaches. So they do need handholding. They do need good materials. They need to see it with their own eyes in order to say, oh, instead of putting in a gas furnace in this building, I'll start thinking about putting in a heat pump. There's still many people who like gas furnaces are highly reliable and affordable. That's been the thinking for years. So how do we show them the new opportunities and how they stack up? There's going to need to be many conversations in many venues to get everybody to understand that and get on board.
And there was another comment on sort of workforce training and development, right? So presumably there are organizations across the country whose job it is to train and recruit the trades, the electricians that are needed for this massive retrofit economy. So we as philanthropy, it would be our role to find who these intermediaries or these organizations are. Can you think of a few examples on the top of your head that you know?
Really good point. So we did mention NYMA and ATRE as two. I didn't put in the Association of Electricians. I believe that each province should have a professional association of electricians. That could be another place to start. And again, maybe even the technical support groups for affordable housing themselves, who work with contractors and architects and engineers, could be another avenue for developing some outreach and training programs.
Colleges and institutes, probably, right?
Of
Who
course, yeah.
train sort of up front in the new generation of all these trades that we need to make sure that they know about heat pumps and all these amazing things that we need to put in buildings. Great. I don't see any other questions right now. So okay, these are questions from Nicolina. I think we can talk with Nicolina later. She's keen. We're keen at McConnell. So this is a lot of information and a lot of recommendations. I mean, I think, it is a landscape assessment. What the report shows us is, yes, there is some government funding, there are some incentives, but there are really barriers to accessing these programs, and that the role of philanthropy is sort of complementary or help to leverage what is out there, but also to really accelerate the amount of public and private capital that's going to go into this space, right? To make sure that it is non-extractive, that it is the kind of patient capital that's needed for the deep energy retrofit project. And as Leslie and Alex have mentioned, it's a rapidly changing landscape. However, we've been talking about deep energy retrofits in buildings for 20, 30 years, right? We've not even begun to reach the scale of what is needed. And we are in an affordability crisis right now. So there is a real risk that we direct capital to deep energy retrofit that don't target or don't put affordable housing at the front line of that capital. And so these are the two challenges we're trying to solve. And I would argue this is philanthropy's sweet spot, right? That we have the flexibility to our granting and our capital investment to play a role in that space. So if there are no other questions, we will be following up by distributing the slides, the presentation. You will have my contact information. We hope that you'll reach out to McConnell to continue this conversation. If there are any aspects of what you see in this report that are of interest, please reach out to me. So we can pursue that and really start identifying sort of where are the immediate opportunities that we can start collaborating together. I mean, nobody's going to go into this space alone. We want to collaborate with other investors and other foundations to pool capital. So that is our interest at McConnell. Leslie, Alex, thank you so much for your time. I certainly have learned a lot that I did not know about this, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again, that this will generate a lot of interest.
Great. Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you,
Have a good day, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.